Hello and welcome to another Warcraft 3 audio commentary. This will be a 1 versus 1 game on Echo Isles. And I think we were both random here, so I didn't exactly know what the opponent was going to be going for. And I was sort of winging my build order, just sort of doing some goofy strategies on this account. And so I do a Crypt and a Ziggurat going for a Ghoul build order, but I'm actually not planning to go for a not specifically planning to go for a Tavern Hero. I didn't really totally rule it out. But my goal was, you'll see I'm building some Acolytes early, was actually to build 5 Acolytes and, sort of advance to fast expand and use the Acolytes to creep. So you don't really, I haven't really seen undead players do this, but it's sort of like, you might say, the poor man's militia creeping. Militia are a lot better in combat than Acolytes are, both in terms of damage, armor, and probably hit points. Actually, I guess the hit points are the same. But Militia does the same, very, very close to the same DPS as like a Footman or a Ghoul, as well as having 4 base armor, even with no upgrades. Whereas the Acolytes, not only do they have 0 base armor and low DPS, but they don't get the benefit of any upgrades. Not that that generally comes into play when you fast expand with militia, or when you militia creep. Usually you don't have any upgrades that soon. But anyway, they can actually get, militia can actually get attack and armor upgrades like the footmen do. So, but anyway, the human player is going for the Archmage, doing the typical militia creep. Looks like he's bringing 5 militia. We'll see how well he does this. He takes a purge on the water elemental. That's not great, but he did sort of lure these creeps to, to focus his Archmage and his water elemental. And he's going to pick up a troll priest so he can heal with that. It doesn't look like he's lost any militia yet. In the meantime, I'm going to be going down to creep my expansion with a Dreadlord. And you'll notice I actually did not get a Graveyard or a Tome of Relics. The reason is, even though Rod of Necromancy is really efficient, so yeah, he didn't lose any militia. But since, even though Rod of Necromancy is really efficient, if you want to get, expansion, it costs you a lot of lumber. So, so yeah, it can sort of, it's only 30 lumber for a Tome of Relics, which isn't too bad. I don't remember if I got cannibalized or not. Actually, if I did, I didn't actually use it on his camp, which seems to defeat the purpose if that's the case. But anyway, back to what I was saying though. You need a decent amount of lumber to like get if you want to get towers, Ziggurat, Spirit Towers, Nerubian Towers, another crypt potentially. Now that's going to be lumber. It's going to cost you lumber. Of course, it's going to cost you gold to get a Rod of Necromancy, to get a Tome of Relics. And then if I want to get a Sacrificial Skull to even, make the expansion, a little bit better, get the Spirit Towers and stuff potentially faster, plus some slight healing on Blight, a Sacrificial Skull is 50 gold. It requires you to have a Graveyard as well. And a Graveyard, of course, costs 210 gold. Now, surely, it's pretty likely that I will build a Graveyard at some point. In fact, right now I'm building one. So, you might say, well, you're going to have to get a Graveyard anyway, and that's true. So, when do you get the Graveyard? What makes sense? Well, if you're going to fast expand, you basically want to get that Haunted Gold Mine up as quick as you can. Now, you do also want to get the Ziggurats and stuff up as quick as you can as well, but another important thing, or potential thing to think about, is if you want to get more production buildings up quickly to take advantage of the extra gold mine. That's another thing. Same with the tower. So anyway, though, I come in here. I'm actually not level 2, which is unfortunate. I've got Sleep instead of Carrion Swarm. So what I've decided to do, since I see that he's focusing the Dreadlord, sort of surrounding him, is just to sleep the militia that actually can get to the Dreadlord. He had about 3, 4, 5 peasants and or militia attacking the Dreadlord, and these buildings are blocking the rest. Well, the Dreadlord, for one thing, has hero armor, and he's got 3 armor, and he's got 650 hit points. So, I'm not too concerned about letting him tank a lot of damage, as long as I can kill some of these militia. And sleep, reduces the damage going to the Dreadlord, and otherwise the militia are sort of at the mercy of the ghouls. So I do get level 2. I did kill a number of his workers. He militiaed everything for quite a long time. He's going to get a really good regen scroll here, which, again, 100 gold, very good use there. Healing footman, his hero, well, I guess his hero's mostly full, but his priest, he's got level 3, so that means level 2 water elementals. He crept this Murloc camp, I guess, in the meantime. So, but yeah, and also in the meantime, I noticed that he had cleared his gold mine, but was not expanding, did not leave a farm behind or anything to scout. So I actually am going to take the big risk of trying to get both the gold mines on this map. These are the only 2 expansion gold mines that are available on this map. So, and I'm going to throw up another Nerubian tower in my main, since I did see that he's got a lot of footmen and stuff, and right on cue, he sort of attacks my main base. I don't know if he's got defend. I actually don't think he does. But right now, I actually don't have the spirit towers up yet anyway. But I do go ahead and upgrade some to control this. Ghouls are sort of, okay, it does have defend. But ghouls are not amazing against footmen, against level 2 water elementals for sure. He gets 3 of them popping out at a time. That's, look at this, 31 to 39 damage. I actually made a mistake. I decided to creep this shop because I thought it would get me, pretty close to level 3, if not level 3. And I didn't have a town portal or really the means to get one very soon. I'm only tier 1, no Tome of Relics. It's like, what can I get from this shop? Maybe a heal scroll, maybe an armor scroll, and maybe a town portal. So that was the thought process. But I messed up trying to macro and micro, my base and creeping. End up losing the hero, which is pretty embarrassing, to be honest. But all the damage that he's doing right now is, he's doing a decent amount. He kills an acolyte here. He's going to kill this ghoul, I think. He's, forcing me to repair with a lot of acolytes. He's going to hit level 4, so he's way ahead of me in terms of a hero experience. His army is mostly full hit points. All these footmen, but they're just attacking a crypt. He needs to just go attack the acolytes, honestly. He's never going to kill this crypt, realistically. Even if he does, it's 200 gold. It's like you kill 3 acolytes, and that's already more than 200 gold. So, plus, they obviously take 210 hit points versus 1300. 5 base armor fortified versus 0 base armor. You can't repair acolytes, whereas you can repair the crypt. So, all in all, a silly decision. I guess he was far away from the towers, arguably. But the water elementals were sort of tanking the tower damage anyway. Defend drastically reduces the spirit damage, spirit tower damage. So yeah, I think that was just a goofy decision. Again, he didn't even get close to killing that crypt. So I just think that was a bad decision. And in the meantime, though, I'm expanding. I'm going to go ahead and get the towers up first. Here at this expansion, and hope he doesn't scout it. He's going to go creep. He can probably get close to level 5 here. He is tier 2, so I don't know, that bonus experience. Maybe. Nah, he's still going to be a good ways from level 5 even after creeping this. But he gets a good item, Roar Scroll of the Beast. I'm nowhere near having any Dispel. I'm very close to level 3. I need to creep like this green camp, I think, is what I end up creeping. And I think I actually get a Tome of Experience here. Not that I need it to get level 3, as I already do have it here. But anyway, I didn't actually upgrade the towers for these ziggurats, so that was a dumb mistake. I upgrade them, I repair them. But I do have a pretty solid army here if I get all my ghouls together now to actually attack him. I actually picked level 2 Carrion Swarm. And I get 1 Carrion Swarm off, but I don't think I actually cast it again. So it's a little bit questionable if I either should have not cast Sleep at all, or if I should have just, if I planned this mass sort of sleep as units, if I should have just picked Sleep to level up Sleep at level 3 rather than Carrion Swarm. But either way, I get some damage on his army. Ghouls are actually pretty bad against sorceresses. That's one of the reasons why I was sleeping them. And he's got his Mountain King coming up here, so I need to be very careful. Stormbolt would be dangerous. Actually, went ahead and slept the Mountain King. I didn't know if he had Thunderclap or Stormbolt, but the way he was reacting looked like he was going to go Stormbolt me. But anyway, I sort of did a bunch of damage to his army, and he actually tried to counter expand, and he found a bunch of towers waiting for him. He didn't actually lose any peasants, unfortunately, but he took a lot of damage on them, and he is not going to be able to counter expand. So now he's looking at some bad situations. He needs to heal these footmen. He's got priests to do it. I don't know why he's not, but just running around right now. But anyway, now he's looking at a pretty bad situation where he's down 2 expansions, towers everywhere he looks. Main base, towered up, expansions, towered up, expansion, towered up, and every single base has at least 1 crypt. The expansions each have 1. The main base has 2. I'm now going to tier 2. I've got a Tome of Relics at the main. I should put Tome of Relics at probably both of these expansions, honestly. So if he does gear up for a sort of a little bit later push, I will maybe have access to tier 2 so I can get Carrion mana potions for Carrion Swarm, healing potions, and Rod of Necromancy potentially at each expansion. So that would be very useful. Now they did buff the Dreadlord quite a bit. Carrion Swarm and Sleep both have reduced mana cost now. This is patch 1.29. I saw his army and thought I might be able to catch the Gold Mine Peasants with that, but I didn't, unfortunately. But so that was a little bit of a waste. But I ended up running from his army. Again, us sort of, dancing back and forth. It benefits me more than him, because as long as I don't lose a bunch of units. Of course, because I've got these expansions running at no upkeep. I'm sitting at 50 food with no upkeep. He's in no upkeep as well, but again, obviously 3 gold mines to 1, 3 times as much income as he does. So I'm just going to hoard gold. I'm not going to jump into upkeep immediately. I do start to make some fiends because he is massing casters, so they're unarmored. They have magic damage, which again is going to be very strong against ghouls, since ghouls are heavy armor. Plus, I think I know fiends have more hit points, 550 versus 340, but they're deep. I mean, they're just being ranged alone is going to be a big deal as well, especially fighting out of like a base. If he's sitting like right here attacking with ranged a bunch of stuff, or he's sitting over here, or maybe with mortars, if his mortars are like right here, I don't want to run all the way out there with ghouls potentially, especially if my army's not strong enough to deal with his. But if I've got fiends, I don't have to maybe run all the way here. I can maybe be sort of in range of the towers and still sort of doing some damage to him. But anyway, I just continue creeping. I get level 4. He doesn't really have the army to crack my base. Casters, the one disadvantage that casters do have is, with all the races really, is that they are very bad against buildings. Their DPS is 10 to 12, average attack speed. They're unarmored, so towers are going to just tear them up. Hit points 325, armor 0. You can't really change that, at least with like attack and armor upgrades. The caster upgrades do, I think, give them more hit points and attack damage, but not more armor. But anyway, they're going to be pretty poor at like knocking down buildings. Defend footmen, on the other hand, a little bit better. They do normal damage, decent stats. Defend obviously is amazing against towers. But again, now I've got level 2 Carrion Swarm. Pop an armor scroll, he immediately town portals. I've got 2 heal scrolls. I use an invulnerability potion, lesser potion of invulnerability from the shop. And again, I killed, a handful of, I guess I just killed like 2 units. But I forced him to town portal. I guess those were his, I think those were his units. Hopefully they were. So now I'm at 66 food, and he was at, he's at 49 food now. And he's built another barracks and a workshop. Mortar teams are going to give him the option, or the ability to pressure my expansions a little bit easier. Though the problem for him is they're not amazing against, they're okay against fiends, especially with a fragmentation shard, which he is tier 3, so he could get that. But the problem is now I've had enough time to sort of mass units and take advantage of the extra gold. So whereas before, he was either ahead of me in food count or the same food count but stronger hero and sort of arguably better units. Footmen, I would say, are strictly better than ghouls generally. With no even with no upgrades. So I get an invisibility potion. I'm gonna leave the Fiend's Burrow here. And I see that his army is running down there, and I did see that he had a couple of mortars. So I was like, that's a little bit annoying. I look at his peasants. I look, he's got an arcane tower, but that's a little far away. But the main thing is, I realize, well, what is killing like maybe 6 to 8 peasants gonna do? I mean, it's more of a long-term type strategy. Like, I'm gonna kill some peasants, and then in the next few minutes, it's really gonna mess him up. Or do I want to go for the real threat right now, which is these mortar teams and these units? I don't want to just give him a couple of minutes just to tee off of my buildings. So I throw some Carrion Swarm at him and force him back and kill one footman. One footman versus maybe 4 to 8 peasants. But I've got mana going into this battle. Whereas if I used a couple of Carrion Swarms in his main base, well, then I would obviously only have that many fewer shots to hit his army with it. So, and again, the threat. What's the threat? Economically, I've got him covered. I've got 2 expansions, so economically, if everything just stays the same, I'm pretty much beating him. So I'm not as concerned about that. Looks like he spent 300 gold to retrain for Blizzard. I don't know how great a decision that was. I mean, a lot of times, especially if you're down in resources, obviously if the idea is I'm about to have destroyers, which are going to make water elementals useless, sure. That's not a terrible sort of assumption, but and again, it is true. I'm about to get destroyers, so that makes sense. But 300 gold is quite expensive. You don't really want to be in a scenario where you need to spend 300 gold to change your hero skills. Like, if I had to spend 300, I've got 2 expansions running, so it wouldn't be a problem for me. But if you're in the middle of a game and you're on one base and you need to retrain for 300 gold, you're probably in bad shape. So, because it's not going to give him like some insane a level 3 Blizzard is very useful. I won't deny that, especially against mass ground units like I've got. But he's not even using it yet. Now there it goes. He finally shoots off a Blizzard. But again, now it's already a little too late. I've already hit him with Carrion Swarm a couple of times. That's a little bit of the thing about channeling AoE abilities like that. I've got to stand there and let him. It's pretty obvious where he's going to be shooting a Blizzard once it starts hitting. So, it's not too hard to dodge that, honestly. Not that I did an amazing job, but, and it's damage over time. So it gives me time to dodge some of the damage, to heal from some of it. Whereas Carrion Swarm, boom, instant damage, instant damage. He ends up sort of trolling me in the chat a little, well, sort of rage chat there, all in caps lock. So caps lock on, totally appropriate name. We can look at these unit numbers here. I produced more units. He actually killed more units than me, but a lot of that was like ghouls and stuff. And acolytes. Largest army, I had way more. At the largest point, 94, almost a full 100 food. So 37 food more than him, probably in like the late game battle. Not to mention some items, healing scrolls, armor scrolls, all that jazz. If we look at the resources, again, I still am not sure whether the gold loss to upkeep numbers are reflected in this gold mine number, or if that's separate. Like, it makes a difference because looking at this number alone, you might say, okay, I mined about 10,000 more gold than he did. That's insane. But then these upkeep numbers, if they aren't part of this, these upkeep numbers are so different. About 3,600 more gold lost to upkeep for me. So if this is accounted for here, and I did sort of net 10,000 more gold than him, that's one thing. But if they're not, and I need to apply this number to this, then to get sort of an idea of the real amount of gold that I took in. Then, you know, I only, you know, maybe took in 60, you know, what, 6,600 more gold than him or something. So, you know, it can make a, depending on the upkeep, it can make a big difference. And here, it was a substantial, you know, over, you know, several thousands more gold lost to upkeep between us. So, you know, that makes a little bit of a difference, but the overall point is still the same. I mined way more gold than him, which allowed me to make a much larger army and sort of control, you know, where the battles took place a little bit. And again, on a small map with only 2 gold mines, controlling all the gold mines on any map is insane. But again, the only maps you can really do it on are ones that are small like this. You know, and even then, it's not exactly easy to control 2 extra gold mines on a tiny map where, you know, scouting them is almost certainly going to happen very quick. It didn't really happen super fast in this game, but he did scout my second expansion. You know, I mean, I'll say reasonably quickly, but he did just sort of stumble upon it. So it's not, you know, if you take all the gold mines, you can't really hide that. So they have to be really, really bad at sort of game sense and scouting to not notice that. So you can't really count on that to happen. But again, if you can hold 2 expansions more than your opponent in the same upkeep and not suffer some sort of catastrophic losses in battles, or you know, let them counter expand, again, on a map with only 2 expansions, that's not really, counter expanding isn't really an option at that point. You have to deal with it. So whether that's destroying their main base or just crushing their army somewhere, out creeping them and getting some crazy tech army that they can't, you know, their tech's behind, they can't deal with it. You know, these are the ways. It sort of changes the dynamic of the game. You know, certain strategies are, you know, sort of have a timing window on them where they're, you know, after, you know, after, you know, maybe 3 to 8 minutes of being behind economically, all of a sudden your strategy is going to lose to a bunch of things that it otherwise would not lose to, you know, because of something like heal scrolls, armor scrolls, you know, more armor upgrades, just bigger armies. You know, if I've got, you know, 5 fiends, you know, versus if I've got 10 to 15 fiends, obviously the DPS is much different. It's a much different food count situation. You know, in terms of war of attrition, it's like, oh well, if you do all this damage, and then I have to spend, you know, 200 gold on a mana potion and 100 gold on 150 gold on a healing potion, you know, I may or may not have that gold to work with. You know, whereas if I've got tons of gold where I can just, you know, spam items and upgrades and units and keep it rolling, you know, over and over, get a bunch of towers, you know, with all those expansions, I can afford towers everywhere. So, you know, you can expect to be fighting near, you know, 2 or more towers all over the place. I can afford to get 4 production buildings and 5 production buildings and pump units over and over. So recovering from battles is quicker. In the middle of battles at my bases, if I've got production buildings at everyone, then that's an advantage anytime I fight near them. If I'm producing units and they're immediately coming out, you know, boom, here's another fiend, here's another ghoul, here's a statue, you know, here's a destroyer, here's an abomination, you know, down the list. So, so yeah, those are the things. So you have to sort of, and again, on a small map, the creeps are limited. There were certainly creeps left on this map in this game, but some of them were a little bit hard to get to, a little bit risky trying to go to my side of the map, leaving his base uncovered and all that stuff, and or running by a bunch of towers and blight. So yeah, but then at a certain point, all the creeps are going to be dealt with, you know, crept out, you know, or even if it's like 90% of the creeps, like, you know, okay, maybe I can go creep 1 or 2 more camps, and get that, but it's not like there's, you know, it's a 6 spawn map like Knollwood with red golem camps and, you know, a whole bunch of expansions to scout, and, you know, and you can level your hero up, you know, multiple heroes up so far on those type of maps, those size maps. Whereas on Echo Isles, there is a pretty hard cap on the like experience level. Even if you crept every single camp by yourself, which is pretty unlikely, but if you crept like 75, three out of the four camps, or 7 out of 10 or whatever you want to say, you can still only get so much experience creeping, and then it becomes dealing with your opponent's army, your opponent's base, your opponent's strategy. So sort of what you can strategies and weapons you can utilize, it's restricted at a certain point. Out creeping your opponent, using map control. Sure, map control is still a thing, out creeping them is still a thing, but there is sort of a ceiling about out creeping. The map is pretty small, so map control may or may not be amazing. There's no healing fountain. There's it's sort of hard to like surprise your opponent, in terms of like running around the map and coming over the trees. I mean, you can do it, but the opponent's probably scouted your base. I mean, it's there's only 2 spawns, so if they know they know exactly where you are, even without scouting in terms of your spawn point. So it takes away some of the complexity there. Now there's a tavern and a marketplace and a shop and mercenary camps. There's not camps that drop like infernal stones and stuff like that, so none of that crazy nonsense. So yeah, the marketplace, you're not going to be looking at infernal stones and stuff in the marketplace as well either. So, but anyway, you're limited. So this type of economic advantage can be amazing on Echo Isles. It can actually be probably the thing you want to focus most on, sort of the economics of the map, because since there's only 2 expansion gold mines, if you control one or both, definitely if you control both, but if you control an expansion and you prevent them from getting one, that is a major, assuming you can mine most or all of that gold, it can be an amazing difference. You see, I didn't mine either of the gold mines completely out, but 10,000 gold difference there. And again, wait another couple of minutes and that's going to jump even more. So, it's harder. It gets harder and harder the bigger that gap is to to overcome that difference, which likely shows up in the army sizes being very a big gap there, or units produced, or maybe items bought in tech. Let's see, tech percentage was pretty close. I didn't tech very hard, honestly, but definitely in units produced, I did outproduce him. Army size, I did get him, and I did obtain more items than him by a little bit. But anyway, the economics of it and the map being so small, it is a very big factor. Whereas on a map like Knollwood, controlling all those gold mines is virtually impossible. Even just keeping them all scouted can be, sort of scouted continuously, can be sort of difficult. So they can, they have lots of options to try to sneak an expansion. If you've got 1 or 2 expansions, they've got plenty of, potential other ones. In terms of the creeps, there's tons of creeps. So, hero levels, can range a lot more just from creeping. Map control, there's a fountain, there's a lot of shops, and like I said, a lot of gold mines and stuff to creep. So, getting and trying to sort of exploit map control can be much more dangerous on these bigger maps. You don't want to say, okay, I got 2 expansions on Knollwood. I can just sit here for 4 to 8 minutes, and if he just creeps all over the place, and I don't, that's it's whatever. I'm still gonna have a big army. It's like, yeah, sure, you may still have a big army, but if you have a a 20 food army advantage, but he's got like each of his heroes is like a level or 2 ahead of yours, or maybe even more. Well, then your advantage is not going to be as scary. Assume I have like a level 3 Dreadlord here. Maybe he's at like 4 and 4, 4 and 3 on his heroes. Um, you know, Depending on what kind of units I've got and stuff, like a level 3 or 4 Mountain King could be devastating to mass ghouls, could be pretty strong against mass fiends. Uh, Casters, should I choose to go for those, could be pretty vulnerable to Thunderclap. Um, yeah, level 2 or 3 water elementals. If I go Gargs, uh, statues, blah blah blah. It's like you have to account for these type of things when you're playing. So it sort of changes the dynamic just a touch. Whereas on Echo Isles, it's more reasonable to say, well, okay, I've got both the only 2 gold mines on expansion gold mines. He can only, maybe there's like 4 big creep camps left. Maybe I'll let him do 2 of those, and I won't worry about it. I'll just mass up, and if he wants to come fight me in my base, we'll fight there. My expansions, you can fight there, and I'll take those battles. But otherwise, I'm not engaging him. I'm gonna wait and engage him when I've really got a massive army size advantage. And the enemy player, you know, he's faced with some pretty tough choices. Try to creep those camps and get some kind of advantage that way, and then fight a little later behind an army size, or try to fight an uphill battle in a base with blight and towers and a shop and production buildings. And neither of those are very attractive options, honestly. So you really need like good timing, good micro, good macro, good positioning. You need all kinds of things to go your way to overcome that economic disadvantage. And that it sort of is a little bit frustrating from a interactivity standpoint. Like if you look at the game like, oh well, I want this to be an interactive, like I make choices, he makes choices, and then whoever's choices and like, sort of micro and everything, if whoever has the, sort of the, in totality of all those factors, who comes out, excuse me, who comes out ahead, that's generally how you like to do it in a strategy game. But it's like, sometimes it feels like in these macro games with mass towers and stuff, it's like, if you miss your timing window and somebody gets a towered expansion, those gold mines have so much gold that it really puts you on a clock. Like, okay, you can only realistically hope to let him outmine you for, this amount of time before it starts becoming almost hopeless that you can win, outside of some other, things going your way. So it's like, oh, I missed this timing window. I didn't scout, or I didn't attack. I didn't have an army big enough to stop this expansion when it happened, for whatever reason. It's like, oh, now I've got a bunch of towers. What do I do? It's like, okay, well now you need, now you're automatically behind. You need, your game sense and knowledge of counters and everything needs to be very strong. Your micro probably needs to be better than his too. And your positioning knowledge, and maybe your item drops, or items you buy, unit choice, all that stuff needs to be very, very sort of, very, very, you need to make very good choices and do very well in all those other aspects to really give yourself a good chance to overcome an expansion, much less 2 expansions. So that's the thing. Like I say, from an interactivity standpoint, it feels, if you get in that situation, it feels frustrating sometimes, especially as undead, who lacks a lot of good siege options, in my opinion. And like ghouls are sort of, weak tier 1 units, blah blah blah. But and again, heroes, they buff Carrion Swarm, so at least it hits mechanical units. But still, Nova, Carrion Swarm, if you want to say Death Coil, Impale. None of the undead abilities, even on Holy Aura, none of those are really good against, like, in base racing or against fortified, like mass tower situations. None of the AoE, none of the nuke spells undead has, unless you want to count, like, Death and Decay, none of those are going to hit buildings. You know, none of them really boost the damage against buildings, like maybe True Shot or Endurance Aura. Both of those type of abilities can boost damage, which sort of um, automatically gives you the chance to do more damage against buildings. You know, I've got, you know, faster attacks from Endurance Aura. That's you know, 5, 10, 15% damage boost on everything I've got. Heroes, units, no matter what the units are, no restrictions. Just like Unholy Aura, except Unholy Aura is not attack speed. It's healing and movement speed. So no extra damage there. And the healing is pretty, you know, it's not very impressive. But anyway, no damage boost there. Same with True Shot Aura. True Shot Aura is restricted to ranged units, of course, but that includes ballistas, that includes Chimera. So, you know, both of their sort of better siege units for the elf are included there. Now, bears are sort of their maybe next best siege unit. It's not really siege damage, but you know, they just do so much damage and have roar that they do normal damage that they're decent against fortified targets. And just in general, they're generally a pretty strong unit at 4 food. A lot of hit points. Rejuvenation is strong. Roar can boost everything. Ballista, Chimera, Archers, Hunts, everything. Heroes by 25%. Yeah, 25%. So yeah, you know, Elf has those options and those things to help in a base race. It's like, what does Undead have? Their core units tend to be piercing damage fiends, maybe piercing damage Gargs, and then destroyers and or frostworms, typically. You maybe throw ghouls and A-bombs in there, but not, you know, they're not great against towers anyway, and they're, you know, having to be in melee range is very bad when you're talking about clusters of towers. Like, if you've got ranged units, at least you can sort of avoid some of the towers some of the time, typically with the range. Whereas with ghouls and abominations, if they've got like 8 towers in their base, and you've got to get hit by like 7 out of 8 every time you run in there, that's just suicide. Like, ghouls, it's going to be ridiculous with just ghouls. Abominations are slightly better because they're having more hit points, but it's still bad. I mean, so it's like that's what you're left with. So then you're like, okay, well, meat wagons. Meat wagons are, you know, they're costly for food. They do get attack upgrades, but they can't get armor upgrades. And you know, efficiency wise, I mean, it's 4 food. You're comparing them to like a mortar team is 3 food, a glaive thrower is 3 food, a raider's 3 food, a bat rider's 2 food, a siege engine is 3 food. I mean, they lose on the food count cost and on like the gold cost too. Everything I just mentioned, they cost more food and more gold than all those units. Now, Demolisher, they're about even with. The Demolisher is 4 food. The Demolisher might even cost a little bit more gold, but it's very close. And but the Demolisher can at least get armor upgrades. Doesn't require a separate building. You know, like the tier 1 building is where the Demolishers are built. So you hit tier 2, you can automatically, you know, and you have a war mill, you can build Demolishers. You have to wait for meat wagons, so the timing is a little different. Can't get armor upgrades, which is a slight nerf, sort of. I mean, I say nerf, it's a slight disadvantage for the meat wagon that the Demolisher doesn't have. Everything else is pretty much the same, though. They're both mechanical, both 4 food, cost very close, range the same, damage very close, so movement speed very close. So everything else is about the same there, but that's, you know, and then like a Chimera is 5 food and 330 gold stuff, but it's flying and it's much different, so it's hard to compare. But then all those other ones though are less, you know, and they're different. You know, they have sort of options. It's like, do I want the fast flying siege bat riders? Do I want the fast, you know, raiders with ensnare and maybe pillage? You know, or do I want the demolishers? You know, the humans, like, okay, do I want flying machines with these upgrades? Do I want tanks with these upgrades? Do I want mortar teams, which are closer to meat wagons? sort of in function. So they all these races, have these options in terms of their siege. Elf, you don't want the glaive throwers, which are similar to the meat wagons, but you can build them at tier 1, or do you, starting at tier 1, or do you want the big lumbering mountain giants, which can tank a lot of damage, taunt, and then pick up a tree and do siege damage? That's one of their weaker ones. And then a chimera, which are flying units, pretty good range. They can do crazy splash damage against ground targets. So obviously they're better against ground units typically than a meat wagon. Most ground, against like probably the average ground unit, rather have chimera versus meat wagons. Same with heroes. You'd probably rather have chimeras against heroes than meat wagons. And then you do need that tier 3, and you do need the corrosive breath upgrade for chimeras. So it's not like, oh man, chimeras are just like super broken and meat wagons aren't. There are disadvantages to chimeras and stuff, but there are also advantages. So anyway, though, it's options. Though you have a variety of options to sort of go for these these siege things. Timing wise is different. Option wise is typically so much better for the other races. Human can get like Cloud from Dragonhawks, disable a bunch of towers. They can get Defend, tier 1 upgrade, which is pretty nuts against most towers. Tanks get fortified armor, so they're really resilient against towers. Plus, sort of the whole other thing about Ziggurats not getting more hit points when you upgrade to a tower, so that's pretty, cost-wise, it's not super efficient. Sort of in base race situations, it's not really great. So again, some of these things are a little frustrating as an undead player, but regardless of all that, if you've got a ton of resources to work with undead, from holding 2 gold mines or even just 1 more than the opponent, you can do some interesting things. Just like any other race can do, interesting strategies that maybe wouldn't work as well if you're running on one base, but they seem crazy when you can just like outmass the opponent. So that's just what I'll say about this map. That the expansions probably are, I would say it's not really arguable that on this map they are really big factors, whereas on other maps it might be slightly less important. The gold mines, they're still really, even compared to on any map, 12,500, I think, or 15,000 gold. That's like for the whole gold mine mined out for sure, but that is a lot of gold. That you can do a lot with that amount of gold. Even half of that is a lot. Even a third or fourth of that is a significant advantage in the game. So it's important to understand that the gold mines are that important. I think even on some maps, like Turtle Rock, the center gold mines, they might even have 20,000 gold. I can't remember. I want to say it maybe 18,000. I don't know. It's a lot more gold on like certain gold mines. So that's another thing to remember. Certain gold mines actually have more gold than others, which I think it would be good if there was like a visual indicator of that, because if you're just like a new player or something, and you're just maybe not a new player, but you just don't really think about it, the difference there. But certain gold mines, it's probably for balance reasons. Some are harder to hold, so they have more to compensate. But if you're not really thinking about that, you're just like, oh, I want to expand. Where do I want to expand? Oh well, this gold mine or this one, they're just in different locations. So that's all I'm looking at. Well, no, that's not all you need to think about. Some of them have more gold than others, so that should be part of the sort of analysis. And again, there's as far as I know, there's no visual indication of that. They both have the same gold mine icon, just one has more gold than the other. So same with like gold mines that have been sort of mined out. It's you might say, well, just click it and look. Yeah, okay, that's, I sort of have a general idea of the gold mines that are different just from playing and actually looking, like you say. But new players, maybe don't know this, and that could decide a game. And it might be a little bit obscure. Like, it's not the most common thing to decide a game. Like, if you both mine out gold mines, that's not exactly the most common thing for, both players to get two different gold mine expansions and then mine them all completely out and be so close that that was the determining factor. Not the most common thing to happen, but a potential thing. So, nonetheless, but yeah, that's sort of that was an interesting thing about this game. A little bit funny that the guy raged on me at the end. I mean, I didn't. It was mostly on him that he let me do that. I mean, he had early game. He had the advantage. Like, he had the hero level, the items. The creep. He cleared a mercenary camp, so he had access to mercenaries. His race, arguably, is the better expansion race with militia and fast building and all that. Towers are cheaper. Tier 1 is arguably stronger. I would argue late game or certain sort of situational counters in the late game for human are just stronger. They slightly helped out Undead buffing Dreadlord with Carrion Swarm, being able to hit mechanical units. That's a pretty big deal if it comes to that kind of a situation where, if the human wants to get mechanical units and you do have a Dreadlord with a Carrion Swarm, high level, that is something to fight back that wasn't available before. Before, Carrion Swarm didn't hit mechanical units at all. So Undead really, the Undead racial heroes really had no great counter to, tanks or flying machines. I mean, the heroes, they really weren't. You had Corruption Orb, which you could say, okay, that's not really a hero thing, but that's useful against everything, including tanks, and I guess flying machines. But and then I guess you could say, well, Unholy Aura maybe helps you surround the tanks. Okay, I guess that makes sense. But in terms of raw damage, no. Nova and Pale. You could maybe make a stretch and say Beetles. Getting 5 Beetles can do some damage to that, but it's not really. I mean, when you need instant burst damage, Undead just doesn't have it. They were forced to rely on like a panda to really try to fight back against these mechanical strategies. Otherwise, they needed like really, really good setups, like a couple of meat wagons to deal with the tanks, or in terms of the flying machines, like maybe really good destroyer, micro, or web, and all this stuff. And it was sort of really annoying for Undead. I see it being probably a little less annoying. I can remember specifically losing games with a Dreadlord that felt like on Lost Temple, it felt like I was winning. I was actually slightly ahead in terms of economy and expansions, but just getting that macro playstyle and the options that Human has versus what Undead had, and again, like Tri-Hero versus Tri-Hero Undead, sort of with a Dreadlord first, was sort of it just wasn't quite as strong. It's like, yeah, Infernal's great, strong, Sleep potentially strong, but in some of those circumstances you need burst damage, or you need like sustain and stuff, and the Dreadlord is mostly against units, like every other Undead hero pretty much, except maybe the Lich with Death and Decay. Every other Undead hero is focused on fighting armies that are A, not mechanical really, or not magic immune, and B, destroying units, not destroying buildings, you see. So when you get into that type of thing, A, masonry upgrades are huge. Human can get masonry upgrades. Their buildings, already I would say they have an advantage with like the towers and the farms compared to like a ziggurat and a spirit tower. They tend to just have more hit points when you sort of take all that stuff into account from their buildings, and also cost-wise probably to their advantage. But you add masonry upgrades, full masonry upgrades on top of that. It's just stupid how big the gap is on that front. And then you look at like tanks versus like what does Undead have? Well, meat wagons, you really have to be careful trying to get a bunch of meat wagons Whereas the human player can get a bunch of tanks, yet also have an air counter. If I get a bunch of meat wagons, like half fiends, half meat wagons, for example, well, the enemy just like they've got a lot of options, but they can realistically just mass griffins probably with Tri-Hero and just stomp that army probably, I would say. So then if I want to put like, oh, I want to get some destroyers in there, well, that's a 5 food unit, so uh, you know, that's also bad against tanks. So you really want destroyers in there? Meat wagons will be strong against tanks, okay, um, but they're going to be very weak to other things like knights, griffins, spellbreakers, maybe stuff like this. So footmen, for example, casters. If I don't have destroyers, maybe a couple of sorceresses with slow. It's going to be very bad. And plus, like I said, tanks 3 food, 195 gold. Meat wagons 4 food, not fortified armor. Don't get armor upgrades at all. Tanks can get 3 armor upgrades, so that's something that meat wagons can't get. Meat wagons don't hit air at all, so that's another thing. And again, 245 gold versus 195. Pretty much, I mean, pretty much in every stat, they're behind the tanks. So that alone, coupled with the masonry upgrade and the hit point situation, towers and whatnot, compared to ziggurats, towers and farms versus ziggurats and spirit towers, just power building, all these things together, it makes it really hard for the undead to win that type of game against human, especially on a map like Lost Temple. So, and I can specifically remember losing games where I thought I for sure had the advantage for most of the game. I was making decent decisions. My hero levels were right up there. I had a Dreadlord first, but the hero levels were up there. I got Infernal, this and that. The opponent at some point I think I even got Infernal before the opponent. He got Mass Teleport though, and then it's like, it's not even close. Like, Mass Teleport, you don't have to buy town portals. I mean, they can obviously sleep to interrupt it, impale to interrupt it, but there's no tavern on Lost Temple, so you don't even have access to the one weapon against like tanks and flying machines, hero-wise, that you otherwise could have. You don't have a panda on the Lost Temple map, so yeah, it's like all that stuff together. So it's like, ugh, I've lost games that were just like incredibly frustrating. That felt like I should have had them in the bag easily, and they weren't in the late game. The enemy just started snowballing, and it wasn't even close. It was like at a certain point, I had 0 outside of like a disconnect or the enemy going like AFK for like 4 minutes. I didn't have a chance to win, even though I felt like I was outplaying him from from early on. Economically I was right there, hero levels right there. Sort of anticipating him. I was doing pretty well. Map control, everything, all that stuff, right on top of it. And it didn't matter. It just didn't matter because the undead just didn't have the tools to really win that game type. I mean, not that he couldn't win it, but it was just harder for the undead player to win that than the human. And again, you can pick other situations and say, oh well, here it's harder for the human to win. Okay, maybe not. I would argue there's a lot of like early game human, arguably I'd say has the advantage. Mid game, I like human mid game. I like human late game compared to undead in terms of in a 1v1. So, in solo, that's just the way I look at it. In a super long game, in a macro game, I think it's hands down favors the human. In terms of specific counters, hands down, I think the human, has it. Auras, Brilliant Aura versus Unholy Aura. That's close. I mean, they both are very strong. Unholy Aura is less restricted, but I think in terms of impact, late game, Brilliant Sword wins. Like, especially with 3 heroes and casters, I would say Brilliant Sword wins because attrition-wise, that helps. And like the mana, what you get from mana versus what you get from hit points, the little bit of hit points that you get is insane. Speed is one thing, but if you can mitigate the speed situation, if it's a bunch of towered bases that they have to attack into, what is the speed doing? I mean, getting between creep camps and getting around the map is useful, certainly, but at a certain point in the middle of a battle, it's sort of diminishing returns. Like, if you're having to fight a pitched battle at a certain point, you can try to kite and stuff, but, can you really kite a late game human with Stomp and Thunderclap and, what are you kiting them when they're hiding in the middle of their bases? What are you destroying every time you're running in and out? Anything? A tower or two, a unit or two. Did you keep the economic advantage? All these things come up. It's like you're gonna run out of mana, probably faster than them. So yeah, it's slow and Thunderclap and Stomp. I'm sorry, not Stomp, but Stormbolt. Maybe aerial shackles if you're like trying to get frostworms or whatever, guards. Or if they're like hitting your base with tanks and mortars. It's like, okay, TPN, what good is moving around faster? I mean, it's pretty limited. It doesn't really add damage, honestly. Whereas extra mana can add damage. It can add more polymorph, more slow, more inner fire, more thunderclap, stormbolt, blizzard, water elementals, healing. So yeah, that's just, I sort of have a little bit of you might say, leaning towards thinking undead, should get some buffs there, at least specifically to try to help out against human, in certain aspects, and just everybody in general. I mean, or like the whole base race, siege damage option thing. You might want to just say, well, thematically, undead shouldn't be their thing. That should be the other races' thing. Well, it's like all the other races, like all three of the other races, that's like their thing to sort of have those siege stuff. I mean, I just don't feel like the anti-unit aspect really is that big of a gap between human or undead and other races. Specifically, if you're up against human, honestly, the nuke potential is about the same, maybe arguably even better for the human. Lower mana cost, Holy Light, 1 second less cooldown, Holy Light, instant hit for Holy Light, so you don't even have a chance, you have much less chance to react, to like dodge Holy Light, or see where it's going, like, oh, I see this Holy Light's coming, I can, maybe react, do this or that staff, do this or that, whatever. I mean, undead doesn't have a staff, so that's not really like, thing, but like burrowing or, whatever, but healing stuff, it hits instantly pretty much, whereas Death Coil, you can cast Death Coil, and then a unit can get killed while the Death Coil is traveling, heroes, units, etc. And then like Stormbolt, even with the nerf, is still a better nuke spell in this specific matchup against human. I mean, you can heal stuff, of course, with Death Coil, but in terms of the raw damage and nuking potential, Stormbolt is better. More damage, stun. I mean, same mana cost, same, I think it's the same cooldown, if I remember correctly. Maybe 1 second more for Stormbolt, I guess, I don't know. But the stun is huge, the extra damage is huge. Also, the Mountain King can get Thunderclap now, which got a huge buff. So you have two really strong damage abilities on the Mountain King there. One stuns and one slows, and they both do massive amounts of damage. I mean, that's the Death Knight only has one, and the Mountain King has like a top tier ultimate. The Death Knight's is mediocre, honestly, and situational. But anyway, all that stuff, the Mountain King's crazy. The Paladin can get Divine Shield and Holy Light, so he's much harder to kill than like a Death Knight. And the human can get Brilliant Sora, so those heroes are never running out of mana. You got to spend three food on a destroyer, or sorry, on a statue to regenerate your mana at sort of a capped rate. So yeah, all that stuff together, it's like I feel like human has got a slight you know, everything else being equal, human has got, you know, enough of an advantage to be significantly, you know, I would be surprised if like at like the top levels of play, if human didn't have a noticeable statistical edge in the games, like over history against undead. I mean, there's been amazing undead players. You know, there's been amazing human players. You know, it may be not. It might be a 2% difference. It might be, you know, 1%, 3%, you know, 0.5%. You know, that we might say, well, that's pretty small. Maybe, I guess. Yeah, it is. It is pretty small. If that's the case, I don't know if it is, but I know like overall, like on all skill levels, stats that they've looked at, it's like, you know, it's within like 1% in all the matchups. Like, but for all the races, like they're all around like 50%. So, but that's all skill levels. I mean, that's like, you know, you're introducing like just poor play and, you know, all kinds of stuff into that equation. So, and again, with human, it is, like I said, it is sort of a knowledge thing. Like they, in general, like you might say that in general you need, like you can just pick fiends and statues and Death Knight and Lich, and it's pretty straightforward, fairly versatile. Just do that strategy over and over and over, and you can have, you know, decent chance to win against all, you know, some of the all the races. It's, you know, especially at low levels, you know, it's straightforward. You know, not doesn't need a lot of specific knowledge in terms of teching, and you know, obviously you can improve on that aspect with information, but you know, it's basically 2 or 3 units, and you know, just nuking and kiting, and that's it. You know, whereas with human, it's like, okay, do I want to fast expand? Do I want to militia creep on these maps? If I do militia creep, which camps do I want to go for? Which timing? You know, do I want to build my altar fast so I can do this Goblin Laboratory? Do I need, you know, how many footmen should I make? Should I get defend? Should I get towers? Should I expand? What time should I expand? It's all these little factors that maybe aren't quite there for the undead player. It's like, okay, the undead wants to get up to tier 3 for orb, you know, maybe destroyers, maybe worms. They want to get tier 2 for statues, for a lich, and they want to make fiends, and they probably want to get some attack upgrades on those fiends, and they probably want to get web when they need it. So it's pretty sort of, you know, linear thing. Whereas the human is like, you know, okay, I'm at tier 2. Do I build arcane sanctums? Do I build griffin aviaries? Do I build workshops? Do I build some combination? Do I just straight take to tier 3? Do I wait? Do I stay tier 2 forever? Do I get a third hero? Do I get an orb? Do I get a staff? You know, you go through all these little decision tree type things, and then you get to a certain point, and you know, you maybe need a little bit more specific knowledge. You know, it's like they've got all these options: siege engines, flying machines, mortar teams. You know, you get arcane sanctums. Do you get priests? Do you get sorceresses? Do you get spellbreakers? Which ones do you get first? Which ones do you get second? Which ones do you get against this race, this race, this race? What do you want to focus on in battle? Do I want to try to play hit and run against their base, against their army? You know, so you might say it's a little bit more complex. Human, maybe, or another aspect, you say, well, just expand and mass towers, and then mass whatever you want. You know, at a low level, that probably works fine. It's probably like, okay, I'll just mass griffins. You know, I'll get an expansion, and I'll try to stop them from expanding, and then I'll just make a bunch of griffins with, you know, 3 heroes. That probably works pretty well, you know, with an expansion against like low level players. So, whereas against a high level player, you know, that might be a, you know, a terrible idea. But anyway, that's going to be the end of this audio. This is ScryMind. So we can look through the score screen just a little bit if you want to look at it, but yeah, this is going to be ScryMind signing out.